Welcome to Mystic and Skeptic. In this week, we'll be discussing World Autism Day with Grace Kohn. She's an author and mother of a person with autism, and she wrote a book called Children of Autumn Autism-Here on Purpose, a book of teachings. And there she describes her metamorphosis as a result of doing everything in her power to help her daughter, Julianne, heal. Welcome to the show, Ms. Grace.
Thank you, David. Really honored to be here. Thank you so much.
We met during the intentional community conversations. I know you give presentations about your book, and your advocacy for people with autism has also led you to building community. Tell us about the projects you're working on lately and a little bit about your book.
So many projects going on at the moment. I think one of the most exciting ones, I think you're going to play at the very end of our podcast here today, is music. So there's a lot of music going on. A song that I co-wrote almost 20 years ago now is just sprouting. It's a long story. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of how that came about, but it's here now at this time, and it's called Stop and Change. And it does tie into my book, I believe, in the sense that the premise of the song really is about stop and change the divisiveness that's occurring in our society, really. And so one of the things that I believe these people, these children with autism, are here, based on my experience, again, David, this is my experience, are here to teach us to be more loving beings. And so I talk a lot about that throughout the book. I talk about that in presentations. I will tell you, when I got the piece for the title Autism-Here on Purpose, it came through in a institute, and I got this message in a dream, Autism Here on Purpose, and I was like, are you joking me? Like, are you kidding? But it was so right. I knew I had to put it in as part of the title. And I was terrified to put that in because I thought, oh my God, every parent on this planet is going to kill me basically for this. Being a parent, I had a child who was a feces smear. I found logs of poo on my dining room table. I found walls and toys and drapes and carpets full of poo on a regular basis. I had a child nonverbal at the age of 7. So this is not a child who was highly functioning and we just did a little bit of work and then she changed. This was a child who was severely autistic and has now emerged and is still on the autism spectrum for sure, and vocal and very active in with people, loves people, and that oxymoron of people with autism apparently aren't supposed to care about other people. Julianne is my daughter's name. Love people as people who love her. So music-wise, I'm working with Russell Tubbs. We've been working together for the last 4 years. He's a professional musician out of New York. We're on the last song of a musical that was written in 2019, and Premix has been helping me with the arrangements, so adding all the flutes and the violins and all the orchestration of the soundtrack, and we're on the very last song. So we're almost there, and that's all been scored. And the ultimate goal there, David, is that every single child on the planet would be able to participate in this musical. It's a musical for children, and the musical came out of my journey with Julianne. So that's what's on the hopper right now.
I got to listen to your song that you developed with Mr. Marco Griggs and John Hirondelle. Tell me about your relationship with them, and why did it take 20 years to put it together?
Well, I've known John for a long time, and basically Marco Griggs is, in my opinion, a genius. He's a virtuoso violinist, and him and John were very good friends. There was a couple of guys in Jasper who would just jam all the time, and they would invite me to come out, but I had children, so I wouldn't actually come out for the jams. But one day, John gave me this music, and he said, here's some instrumental music, see what you can come up with around it. So I just played with it and came up with the lyrics and the melody line for Stop and Change. And we recorded it. And then basically, I honestly don't know. We all went our separate ways, is what happened. We all got busy with our lives. My daughter, actually, the feces smearing, that section of her life, that came out later. So when we recorded the song, she was probably around 4 years old, somewhere around there. And then feces smearing and all of that came out later. So I was very focused on them. And plus I was working with my husband. We had a theater company in Jasper, so we were performing 7 nights a week. So it just kind of went to the side. And then I got involved in other projects and so forth. And then just about probably 2 months ago now, I just got this little thought and I was like, oh, I wonder whatever happened to that song, Stop and Change. And I wonder if anybody has that song, because I certainly didn't have a recording of it anymore. So I contacted John, and I hadn't talked to him in a couple of years either. He's moved, he has 3 kids now, so he's busy. And lo and behold, he still had a copy of it. So it was amazing. And then it was to find Marco, and the elusive Marco, and nobody knew where he was. And just I pursued trying to find him every day. I would send a Facebook message to one of his friends, and nobody knew where he was or how to reach him. And then just coming out of a meditation one day, my husband said, did you try 411? You know, up here in Canada, you can just dial 411 with the last name. And I thought, oh, simple dimple, try that. But no Marco Griggs. But I punched it into my computer, and actually an obituary came up for his mother. And on the obituary was a picture of the house that they lived in. And there is a tie-in here to Children of Autumn, which is the name of my book. It's really been my life's work, David, is around Children of Autumn. I was given the song Children of Autumn before Julianne even arrived on the planet. And everything I do is around that now. And so Marco and I had talked about doing the instrumental pieces around Children of Autumn many years ago. And I was actually at his place where his parents lived, and I met his parents, so I knew the house. And so there's his mother's obituary, and there's the house, and there's the address. So right away I wrote him a letter, snail mail, sent it off just with a prayer of please say yes, because of course I wanted his, he's a co-writer, and I really feel the song is primarily his essence coming through there, and it's just so brilliant. I just think it's fantastic that I just want the world to hear it. So I got a little email back from him just the other day saying, yes, I say yes, you can use the music. And I'm like, yes, awesome.
Wonderful. Well, let's start from the beginning. I was living in Tennessee, and I went to the zoo, and I was taking my 1-year-old, I guess she was like 3 months old, and my 3-year-old, and I just happened to land on People with Special Abilities Day. And being the dummy that I am, I was like really like taken aback. I was like, how common is it for children to have special abilities? Because it seemed like everybody in the zoo had that. And, you start getting concerned, like, because knowing with my nephew who has autism, we didn't know until he was 3 or 4, and then his mom was in denial until he was like 5 or 6. So we were like, how common is this? And is it like some people that I know that say that they're the star children, like you said, that they're giving us maybe a warning or teaching us that we need to be more in touch with nature or with God? So let's talk about it from a scientific perspective, from what you have experienced it, and then we can talk about it from spiritual or mystical sense. What do you know about autism? And you don't hear autism being manifested in young ladies as much as young boys. What has been your experience from the medical and the mystical side?
Okay, so my understanding actually, and again, information, David, is changing daily, really, about this. But the studies that I looked at when I was really, working with my daughter, so now she's 7 years old, right? She's nonverbal, she's not toilet trained, she can't do a thing, she's a feces smear. I mean, what she could do was use her hands and watch TV and walk. She could do those things. Um, she had been misdiagnosed originally at this time. We had taken her down to a hospital in Edmonton. She went through 3 days of testing. She was seen by many different specialists. And throughout the report, they all said, whether they were a fine motor skill therapist, whether they were a physiotherapist, whether they were a speech therapist, whether it was a pediatrician, they all looked at her and said, even though she's doing this, and even though she's doing that, and even though that's very within the spectrum of autism, we're not going to diagnose her with autism at this time. And at that particular time in Alberta, Canada, it was quite political about if you got a diagnosis for autism, you got funding. And if you didn't have a diagnosis for autism, you didn't get funding. So that has all changed now, thankfully, and we ended up going back to the same pediatrician who originally diagnosed her. The first time she spent with us, she spent 10 minutes. The second time, she spent an hour and a half. And she had all kinds of training now, new training on what really is autism and how do you diagnose it. And so the medical profession has for sure made gains. Julianne is now 26 years old. So we're going back here when I'm talking about this 20 years ago. So the medical profession for sure has way more diagnostic tools. They're able to, because there's such a variance with each individual child. And so to kind of put them in a cookie cutter, brand them is challenging because they are still unique, even though they have, they're on the spectrum. So medically, that was our first experience for sure there. Then I would say we did a lot of work with her, and this was under we worked with a fellow named Jonathan Alderson, and he has a company called IMTI. So he introduced a lot of different ideas into our world, things around diet, a lot of studies that we did around Julianne's liver, her genetics. We did studies on her bowels. We did studies on her gut health. We did a lot of studies to see what was going on. And again, if you look at the studies that came out, a number of years ago, there is this idea that a lot of children with autism have an issue with their liver. A lot of children with autism have an issue with their gut health. And for sure, I've noticed, again, I can only speak from my experience with Julianne. So my grapes of wrath has been by really working with her gut and her gut health, we started to see things change for her. So we started to see much more eye contact. We started to see language. We started to hear language. We started to see interaction. So that was one piece, was that. The other thing that we started to do with her was also chiropractic care. So we started to visit with the chiropractor here in Jasper, and Julianne's good friends with him now, and that also seemed to help. And then a third thing we did, which is quite a story in itself, how that came about, but we went to Mexico for a number of visits, and we did hyperbaric oxygen treatment therapy with her. And I don't know if you're familiar with hyperbaric oxygen therapy, but again, this was recommended from a medical doctor in Calgary that I then saw. And he was the first person to mention to me, her brain's on fire. Like, it's the inflammation is really affecting her brain. And if you bring that down, if you can bring that inflammation down, you're going to see a change in your daughter. So we did a lot of hyperbaric chamber uh, work with her. And again, the nervous system really started to calm down. Julianne had a lot of issues when she was younger, behavioral issues. We used to call her Tiger because she would just be like an animal. Like she'd just lunge at you. She took skin out of me. She couldn't sleep, the poor kid. I mean, I'd hold the door shut and she'd scream herself to sleep, and then she'd fall asleep on the floor, and I'd put her into the bed. But her nervous system was just firing, you know, it was just out of control. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what I can offer at this time.
Well, thank you. And I was very interested in there was a report on the public media about a young lady who had some strange phenomenon that happened to her, like in her early 20s. She started having these rage episodes where she would get super violent and aggressive towards her family. And it made me think of all these stories in the Bible, or in the New Testament, or in other traditions, where they assume that someone's demon possessed, or that someone is, being burdened by a spirit. And then even in the New Testament, they called someone with seizures, having an unclean spirit. So in their ignorance or lack of scientific knowledge, people with problems were considered to be under the influence of something. And then she found out that her brain was inflamed, and that's what was causing this aggressive behavior. And I just wonder about the countless women and children throughout history who have been misdiagnosed by spiritual folks and assume the worst of, because they don't know what's happening. And my sister, who has a child with very extreme autism, or he might not be properly diagnosed himself, she gets dirty looks, she gets mistreatment from a lot of other parents, and she's been kicked out of places because her son, runs into traffic, or screams and howls. And so the trauma that comes from being judged and misjudged and mistreated, as you're trying to figure out how to help your child, is unbelievable. Did you have any of those experiences as you were trying to help her?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. That's a big part of why I actually do what I do, because I have this vision of a mother who really needs to hear what I have to say. That's why I'm here, because for sure it's absolutely challenging. I had so many people, even in this town, even when you're working to help your child, you have people talking about you behind your back, who are like, oh my God, look what they're doing. They're putting this child in blah, 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 blah. And there's all this, misinformation. They don't even come and ask you, what are you exactly doing? I was in a school, so I had to obviously give a presentation to the principal of the school and the teacher of Julianne to propose a solution to. I wanted my child to have an education, for example, and it wasn't working in the classroom. So, I learned from the Options Institute, which is in the States, and they have an amazing program going for children with autism called the Sunrise Program. And I learned, the best place for her ultimately is actually in a place where there's no stimulus, like because these children are very sensory, they're very sensitive. They're very extremely sensitive people, David. So they need, and they can't, they can't factor out all the different senses. So everything's coming at them at once. And so they hear everything, they see everything, they can, some of the kids are really, really sensitive to touch. So what I wanted for my daughter was, I wanted her own little space that she could work one-on-one with a therapist and learn. I wanted her to learn how to read. I wanted her to learn how to write. I wanted her to have, all those things. So, and yes, we did a presentation and the principal was on board, and Julianne made gains. This is a person who was 7 years old who didn't speak. And in the first month that we worked with her, she said 1,000 words. So I was flying. I was like, oh my God, my child speaks. It's a miracle, right? So, absolutely, have been criticized enormously. Julianne, again, I'm not sure what your nephew is like, but what Julianne doesn't seem to understand is social boundaries. That's a big piece for her. So we would be out in places, and if people had left their drinks, let's say, on a table, she'd just go up and help herself. Actually, I have a funny story. We were in Paris, so I had worked with her now for many years. Okay, so she was much more functioning. So I actually took her on a trip, and she has a very big love for Vincent van Gogh. So I took her to France, and we arrived in France. It's a long trip, obviously, from Canada. We flew first of all to Germany, and then we drove from Germany to France. So it was like a 13-hour drive. Then we go out and we go for dinner, and we walk into this sushi restaurant. And I'd heard all this, how there's all these beliefs about all these different people and all these different cultures. And I'd heard that in Paris, you better be careful because they're going to just be like, oh my God, what are you doing? And so much, this was the information I got, was that there was going to be a lot of judgment. Julianne walked up to a complete stranger couple's table, put her hand right into their food, their sushi, helped herself. She was starving. So she just helped herself. I was horrified. I was like, oh my God, they're going to kick me out of here. And they literally handed her the plate of food. And for me, David, it was, again, another miracle of all these people who said all these Parisians were going to be uptight and wrong, misperception, incorrect information. But again, you feel that anxiety as a parent where you feel like everybody's going to turn on you and they're going to blame you for it. And of course, there is history of that. Like if you look at the history of mothers who have had autistic children, they were called refrigerator moms. I don't know if you've ever heard that term, but the history of autism is that the mothers who had autistic kids, they blamed the mothers. They said the mothers were cold, obviously, and it was because of these mothers' coldness that's why these children are the way they are. In my experience of going to places like the Options Institute and being surrounded by parents who have a child with autism, and there at the Options Institute, people come from literally all over the world. Everyone I met was amazing, and everyone I met wanted the best for their child. And so, these are myths. These are myths that unfortunately existed at some point, because I know, certainly for myself, absolutely challenging, absolutely, so much judgment. Because again, I don't know what your nephew looks like, but in Julianne's case, she looks typical. So if you just look at her, you would not know that there is something different, that she's not typical. So people again make those judgments that, oh wow, this child's out of control and the parents not able to take care of them, and blah blah blah. So you do have to develop for sure a thick skin, and that's part of the training I give to parents is resiliency training, because I literally got to a point where I could walk around and be like, you know what? I know that I'm doing the best I can for my daughter. I know that she's a good person. And if people want to judge us, not my problem. You know what I mean? I will forgive them. Like from a biblical point of view, then I will forgive them. So that's how I've dealt with it, basically.
But the challenge with the child having an effect that looks like there is no concerns is what we have with my nephew. He's 15. He's tall. He's big guy, and my sister had to buy him a shirt that says autistic so he doesn't get shot by the police. And I never thought that we would be in that place. My dad was concerned because he could tell that he was very strong, and that since people are not able to tell that he has um, a special ability, that would be a problem. But how do you manage that? Like that reality is, it's almost like, the conversation that African Americans have to have with their sons. Like, you are going to be a target if people misjudge you or assume that what you're doing is dangerous. How do you manage that as a family?
I think that's where the community piece comes in. I think that's really how that segued into that for me, is making sure that primarily she's with people that love her and um, understand her for sure, and that she's just in an environment where those issues are very limited. And if she's in a situation where there's a possibility of harassment or anything negative, um, that there's somebody with her, right? That there's somebody with her. Because again, in my daughter's case, unfortunately, given all the craziness that's going on in North America with children and child abductions and so on, she's a very attractive young woman too. So I make sure that there's somebody with her. That's how I deal with it.
And then, speaking about the mystical component, I thought it was beautiful when you said that they're here to teach us compassion, to teach us love. Um, in my work in pediatric and adult hospice, I've seen a lot of families come to that determination that instead of feeling as punished by God, or feeling that they were given a bad hand, and they're victimized by the circumstances, they feel that it's an opportunity for love, for compassion. Some families even say that they were picked especially for the purpose of taking care of someone with an illness. And then what I started to consider is that if you think about it from a monotheistic perspective, the idea of someone having limitations, or now you call them special abilities, is that they are in tune with the divine, that uh, they don't have all those filters and walls and things that get in the way of us reaching our fuller self, that they are being vulnerable is actually a blessing. And then in the Middle East, they say that whoever takes care of someone who's sick actually gets a blessing from God. So they're almost like angelic beings that teaches compassion. And in the Catholic families, they see a lot of the suffering as redemptive. So I've been taught a lot from families that are caregivers, and you want to embrace that, but sometimes you wonder if it's almost like um, wishful thinking, or them trying to process their grief in a positive way. But what's wrong with that? Like, I think that it's all about how you take situations, and you can always go in a destructive way and in a non-supportive way. So for people to find meaning in their struggles is a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I did a lot of presentations prior to COVID where I actually bring up Viktor Frankl, if you're familiar with his work. So he was a Holocaust survivor, and you just tweaked me to think of him because when you said life meaning, so that was a big part of his experience in Auschwitz. Was he came to this realization that life, for whatever reason, was asking this, the situation that he was in, of him. And so when he came out of Auschwitz, I don't know if you know the story, but he basically made it his life's work to educate people that, your life's meaning is going to come out of your life, you know? And so with Julianne, absolutely. I went through those stages, David, that you talked about, with the grief, with the anger. I mean, I grew up in a very religious household. I was confirmed. I went to Sunday school. I know a lot about the Bible. And so certainly there were times when I was, talking to God saying, what are you doing to me here? Like, what is this? Because she would make gains, particularly in the toileting area, which is a very button pushing area for most of us. She'd make gains and then she'd slip back. And then she'd make gains and then she'd slip back. And this was going on. So I took it personally for quite a long time. And I'd have these conversations, and they weren't always pretty conversations. I wasn't always the most loving person. But I came to this realization at some point where it's like, you know what? There's no man sitting on a cloud going, I'm going to mess up Grace's life right now. I'm going to make her daughter, I'm going to make her go backwards. I'm going to, make her worse than she was. I had to break through that concept of consciousness that the idea of God that I had, and wherever I got that from, was not working for me and was incorrect. And that God, so now I've been studying the Course in Miracles. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I've been studying that for 29 years, actually. So I started studying that before Julianne even arrived on the planet. And my understanding now of God is all the love that exists. That's God. All the love, not in our universe, in all the universes, in all the galaxies, that's God. So in the Course in Miracles also is this idea that miracles are possible, right? That there's a thought form that I'm entitled to miracles. That's one of the thought forms that you study if you go through the workbook. And what I can tell you from working with my daughter intensely is absolutely miracles have happened. I mean, this is a child who was nonverbal at 7 years old. This was a child who, again, like I said earlier, could basically do nothing, who now reads, who can downhill ski, who can ride a bike, who can sit on a computer and work with that, who can sing. This was my dream when I was at the Options Institute, that because I love to sing, that we would sing together. She knows more lyrics, David, than anyone you would know. I mean, she can, you name it. Bob Marley's one of her favorite artists. She'll sing every word of every song, and she knows it all, right? So there's just too many miracles to even talk about. But what I can tell you is absolutely miracles can happen, and I've witnessed them many, many times. So yes, you don't just sit back and eat bonbons and go, okay, Jules, go do a miracle for me, start talking. No, it was a lot of work. There was a lot of effort that went into that, a lot of perseverance, a lot of patience, a lot of compassion, a lot of imagination, tons of flexibility, and it paid off, right? Because now we have this being who can communicate and now, actually, David, it's really fascinating because people want to listen to her, because when she decides she wants to share some really profound information, she will. And people literally stop in their tracks and lean in to what is she talking about. Now, not always, but everyone who's worked with her, and there's over 40 people who have been on the team, and I called it the Miracle in Motion team, has had that experience with her where she has said something so poignant to them, specific, that they're like shaken out of their skin almost. So there's something going on here. I like what you said about the mystical. You wanted me to speak about the mystical a little bit, and I want to tie it in also to the new science, what they're finding. So I recently was given a book to read called A Stroke. I believe it's called A Stroke of Insight. And I'm going to double check that for you, and maybe we can put it in the credits. But it was written by a woman who is a brain specialist. And she is a Harvard professor. And she basically, the storyline is she had a stroke. And she knew so much about strokes that as the stroke was happening, she was aware of how her brain was shutting down. And so she was only in the right side of her brain for 8 years, okay? And she talks about that right side of the brain as this amazing place of presentness, of connection to source, call it whatever you want, connection to compassion, empathy, joy. And she realized, wow, like this side of the brain, so in our biology, we can have this really connection to presentness. And that's, I have a woman who works with Julianne using a protocol by a doctor named Chickley's, and they work with the brain. Actually, he's so they work with the brain, and um, what the woman who works with Julianne has said, she's so active in the right side of her brain. She said, I've never felt a brain like this, where it's just so right side, because it's so present, it's so loving, it's so compassionate. What we did when we were working with her and continue to work with her, because we're always moving her forward, always more, is making that bridge to the left side of the brain, right? So I want to give you an example of, it took us, for example, 2.5 years of every day, David, working with her in a special playroom that we created, that we learned how to do at the Options Institute. We learned, one of the things we had as a goal was how to recognize the numbers 1 through 5. That's it. Symbolically, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2.5 years we spent every day working on that. She finally got it after 2.5 years. But this was that, I think of it as a highway that we were building from the right side to the left, and so that continuous information could go back and forth. The miracle there was, after we celebrated, and after I went through a moment of, oh my God, it's going to be another 2.5 years of 5 to 10. But this is why I say autism here on purpose. She taught me how to be present. Instead of thinking about the future, thinking about the past, it was like every single day that we went into the playroom, we were present just with the goal that we had, just for that day, the next day, the next day, the next day. And the miracle was this. A week later, she had 5 to 10. A week later, 10 to 20. A week later, 20 to 30. So the highway, the 2.5 years that we chipped away, built this highway. If we wouldn't have done that, when that happened, I went, oh my God, think of all the people that we give up on. Think of all the people, whether they have autism or any special needs, I don't care what it is. And we just say, forget it. They're never going to learn. We know the brain is plastic. We know from people like Deepak Chopra, the brain is constantly, every part of our body is recalibrating itself. My nose isn't the same nose that I had 6 months ago. Our cells are rejuvenating. And thankfully, I'd heard Deepak Chopra talk about that when my son was 2. So he's going to be 30. So I heard that 28 years ago. So that was a blessing for me to give me a glimmer of hope that my daughter could change. So these are some of my thoughts.
No, you give us so much hope and understanding. What happened to us is that when we were concerned about the possibility of my nephew having this special need, and my family not being very open to providing him support, because the quicker you get them support, the quicker you can kind of steer them in the right direction. We saw a documentary on HBO that had a young lady who had 3 sitters, and I guess her family was wealthy or something, but she was able to go to college by having someone redirecting her throughout the day. And we started thinking, well, what about the people that don't have any resources? What about the people that have parents with other kids and a lot of responsibilities? What do you do? Do you hand them over to the state? Do you create an amazing community like the one you've created? Like, what resources are available? And my sister moved to Florida, where they have a lot of support for people with health concerns, and it's like a state-based services. And I hear the same thing from California, but here in Texas, you're on your own. So our friend who was part of the same birth class, and she had one of the only boys, he has kind of low spectrum or and she has to pay out of pocket to get him therapy. So what do people do, and have you had families come to you during your presentation and say, I would love to do the same stuff, but we just don't have the ability to do it?
So totally understand so many points of what you said there. So I want to start with the biological family. So I went through that as well, where my biological family, and they're passed on now, my parents, had a really hard time. And so I think for a lot of grandparents, maybe, and not all for sure, but even partners, husbands, wives, I've seen both, where there's something in the child that is affecting them so deeply that they can't even almost deal with it. So they want to just blame the parent. It's something that you must have done, you're doing wrong. And so there's no or little support. Okay, so I understood that. So I lived that. What eventually happened for me was I created a network of volunteers, David. So there was no payment originally, right? It was an opportunity for them to learn something, and really truly the payback was, I believe, that when they saw her accomplish things, there was two paybacks actually. One was this idea that things can change. Things can change. So people literally witnessed that with their eyes, and we were like, wow, here's a person who can't speak and is now speaking. That's amazing, right? Here's a person who, couldn't print her name and is now printing her name. Here's a person, many things that she did, right? So they saw that. The other thing that was really fascinating for people when they volunteered was they also realized how grateful they were for the capacities that they had. And this is also part of why I say it's autism here on purpose. So we take so much of what we can do for granted. Oh my God, we tie our shoelaces and we're not even present. We're already in our vehicles, we're down the street, we're already at our next meeting or whatever. When we worked with Julianne, and every person worked with her the same way, because we all had the same exact way to teach her something. So let's say we were teaching her how to tie her shoelaces. We had this little game that we taught her, and to this day, she still remembers it. It's going to the train station, then the post office, under the bridge, tighten it, there's a balloon, da 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 da. So we all did the same exact movements with the same story. And when you start doing that, we realized, wow, this is a little bit complicated. Like, look at this, right? But she made us get into our bodies, and realize how amazing our hands are and our brains together. And whether it was doing up a zipper, whether it was doing up a button, whether it was jumping forward, these were all things she couldn't do at one point. Not to mention, all the other zillions of things we do. So there was this appreciation that I used to host a dinner once a week to start with, and then it was every other week. This is how I paid the people. And we would talk about the progress Julianne made and how much more eye contact she was making, how much more interaction she was making, if there was any interaction on her own accord where, she was just saying to us, hey, I want to interact with you. And once in a while I would ask people, what have you learned from Julianne? And everyone, there was this gratitude of, wow, I'm pretty awesome. Me as a human is quite the machine. And I think if I could speak for everybody that worked with her, that was such a big gift, and unfortunately we have to remind ourselves of that sometimes. We are, we're incredible beings. We really are walking around miracles, and so that was one thing. Then, like you suggested with your sister moving, for sure, I would move if I had to. I'm in Alberta, and Alberta was very generous once they changed that requirement that you had to be diagnosed with autism to get funding. They made it available to all children with special needs. then, you still had to show that your child needed funding and so forth. And you had to be accountable, obviously. But there was definitely funding in Alberta. And so that's why I stayed here. My family is in Ontario, they across the country basically, and they wanted me to come back. And I was like, no, there's no funding there. So I would encourage people to move wherever, if that's what you have to do that, you know. Again, I go back to the idea that autism isn't easy. I'm not saying that. I'm saying autism is here on purpose, but it does challenge you like nothing I've ever seen. So yeah, maybe uprooting yourself, leaving your friends and family behind. We did that when we first came out to Jasper from Toronto. We did that because we were running a theater company. This was long before Julianne, we knew she had autism. She was 2 years old, and she was just nonverbal. And her dad was a late bloomer. Einstein was a late bloomer, as far as his verbosity went. So I wasn't worried about it, you know. But we left our families, we left our home, and it was challenging. I understand that. And we cried a lot of tears getting on that train and so on. And you're not sure what you're walking into, and you don't know if the place you're moving to is, if you're going to, build roots there. So all these unknowns that you have to step into with a child with autism, if you want to, this is the choice you have. For me, I was very passionate about doing everything I could to, I wanted her, I just had this fire. I don't know why, David, but it was to do everything I could to bring her to a level that at least I was happy with, and at least confident that she wasn't suffering, like that was a big piece. Like I see her now, she lives in Calgary with her dad, and she's happy. Like she's a happy person. We're still working. We still have goals, but there's this, she sleeps at night. She's much more happy in her body. She has tons of people who love her. She loves music. So she loves to read. She loves nature. So, you know, it's challenging for sure. But to me, I often go back to Nietzsche's idea of, where there's a will, there's a way. So yes, the other thing, oh my God, I have to share here is, yeah, like I took my ego out of the situation too. Long before we had crowdfunding, I basically was doing that in the sense of I would write a letter to every single person I knew, and I would ask for money. And I will tell you, that was uncomfortable action. Like, as Tony Robbins would say, I did not want to do that. That was never supposed to be part of my life. Was basically, I called it sophisticated begging. Like, that was not how my life was supposed to go. But it was either I do that, or I had a full-time job and worked, and then I couldn't work with her and the team, which was a full-time job, So I did that, and I understand that. That's hard. It's hard to put your ego aside and say, you know what, I'm literally asking you for money. Can you give me some money so I can continue this program with my daughter? But again, David, oh my God, it was incredible, the amount of outpouring that I got, the amount of love. People that I was afraid to ask, they would blow me away. They'd give like $600, and I was like, oh my God, I almost didn't even ask them. And so there's this real lesson for me about letting go of persona, letting go of the ego, so many pieces that, again, that's why I say autism here on purpose, because if anything, as much as we helped her live a better life now, for sure, she affected us, and me for sure. And I'm a very different person than I would have been had I not had her. I know that for sure. So that's the blessing, and I like myself who I am, because I'm a kind person. I care about things. I care about our world. I care about nature. I do believe miracles are possible. I do believe change is possible. And it doesn't even have to be for someone with special needs. All of us are changing and have things we want to change and grow into, and behaviors we want to stop. So it's for all of us. And that's the biggest thing too, is she was a mirror to me. I like to talk about the word autism as AWE, tis them. And it's this idea of a mirror that she literally made me look at myself in a different way. That, Mom, you're awesome. Like, don't you see that you're awesome? We spend so much time, David, being, thinking that we're not good enough, we're not this enough, we're not rich enough, we're not, whatever enough. Like, we're just never enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not whatever. I don't have enough Facebook friends. I don't, whatever, right? And this child, just by being in her presence and working with her, helped me realize, no, you're awesome, and you're awesome, and we're all awesome, actually. That's the truth.
Well, I appreciate you giving us a more human definition of miracles, because one of our biggest challenges when I worked in palliative care was that I'll be talking about getting in touch with reality and the nature of illnesses and the mysteries of life. And then a doctor will walk in and say, well, God can always do a miracle. And I'm like, stop giving people false hope that their person is going to get cured. And usually with someone who had a terminal illness, and then they would bring up God, and they would bring up, 1 in a billion situations. And I was like, the whole point of a miracle is that it never happens, or when it happens, it's a miracle. It's something out of the ordinary. But the more that I've been working with people who are dying, the more you become conscious of everything we do is a miracle. Like you were saying, that waking up in the morning, having the ability to breathe, the ability to talk, to eat. There's people that are so debilitated that they're not able to do most of the stuff, but they still have some type of consciousness and some type of memories and the warmth of their hand and their love that they feel from others or that they give away. So every single thing that we experience in this life has a special component to it. So if you have a broad definition of miracles where it's like, we don't know how this stuff came about. We don't know. We might, through the natural process, able to understand some things, but there are so many other things like synapses and love and a sense of peace when the world's in chaos. There's so many things that are mystical and magical that if you close yourself off from that, and we live in a very cynical society where I'm afraid we're like heading towards I don't know if it's totalitarianism or utilitarianism, where unless someone serves a purpose for others, they have no worth, and where everything is so disposable. People are disposable, and everything is a commodity, and it worries me that if we don't support the people like you who are giving meaning and reminding us of how important every single human being is, and everybody has those special uniqueness, that we turn into a very careless society and a very dismissive. So we have to pull together. We have to find the ability to take care of those that need us, and do it for them. Not like, I believe that you can't love others unless you love yourself, and that there's nothing wrong with getting a reward in the sense of fulfillment. But a lot of times people either have a martyr mentality where they just give themselves fully and they die in the process, or they have unless I get something out of this, why am I even bothering? So it's a balance to be able to find that healthy relationship and healthy. They talk a lot about refilling your cup, and you can't help anyone unless you have the love and the strength that you need. So tell us about your desire to build a community, and what would a community look like from all the things you've learned from your experience with Julianne?
Uh, well, I mean, I feel like we've already, there is a community already. There's many communities actually that are interlocking with each other. That's how I feel from my personal experience with Julianne. I always thought that we would be building an actual community and we would live there. And that still might happen. What's happening now is there's a lot of different friends of mine that I've met through Julianne, through working with Julianne, are starting those little communities all over the place. And I'm kind of like a weaver person where I'm involved in all of them, and then doing all the work that I know I have to get done. I just want to share a thought that I had, David, on something you talked about there about filling your cup. And that's something that I'm building right now is a community for women, particularly. And it's no offense to men, but it's just, um, it's a community for women who need that resiliency training, that need ways to fill their cup. Because I learned that through Julianne. If I didn't take care of myself, if I wasn't full, I was actually no good to her, never mind my other son, who also I love just as much, you know? So there's that also is a challenge too for parents who have more than one child. You know, I never wanted my son to suffer because he had a sister with autism. That's not fair. That's not fair to him either, right? So you're juggling a lot of things there. But so to manage all of that, I really had to learn exactly what you said. Martyrdom is done. Forget about it. You can't do it. It's not going to work. You're going to burn out, and then what? You know, then who's going to take care of these guys? So you got to take care of yourself, and then, you know, the rest is it will work, and it did work. It did work like that. So I just wanted to touch on that. Um, my ideal community would definitely be one, and I do see it again. Like I say, I was just at an event recently in Calgary where my daughter was welcome. She was, it was a birthday party, and people were so happy with and so comfortable with her being there in her way, like just standing up, doing what she wanted to do, singing, moving around, going up to people, giving them a hug. Again, they know her, so they're comfortable with that. My ideal community would be one where we aren't so, like you said, not so we're not so judgmental about making sure that I'm giving you this, so now you have to give me that, and it has to exactly line up on a monetary level. We all have gifts. So if you're good, like Julianne's great at just filling a space these days with love and sound. She'll sing your face off, and people love that because it just brings this joy to the room. So that's what she does. That's what she brings. And so, and also she also brings this trust that I'm going to be taken care of. Like she never seems to worry, and we've talked about this amongst our family, is that I'm fine. This is the message she broadcasts. I'm fine. I'm being fed. I'm being taken care of. Look, I'm safe. All is well. So this is what she puts out there. Other people have, their gifts, whatever their, I believe everybody, I have a very Steiner, I don't know if you know who Rudolf Steiner is, but he was a great mind. He started he coined the term biodynamic farming. He started Waldorf schools, the idea behind Waldorf schools. Very brilliant man. Anyways, he believed that everybody comes here with a purpose, like a seed, that they're already seeded with that purpose of what they're here to bring to the planet. And so in a Waldorf school, you would have the same teacher for 8 years because he or she would just be watching you, David. What is David about? Who is David? What is he here to bring to this earth? You know, and they would really nurture that seed and allow that in you to blossom, right? I went to school with a person in university who literally thought she was stupid because she didn't do well in the course she was in. Why? Because she's actually a healer. That's what she is. And until she found her way into, by luck, thank God, a supplement shop, and then they put her through a course through the naturopathic college and all this. Oh my God. Like, we were all blown away because she believed she wasn't that bright. We did too. And now she was being nourished and nurtured and watered in a whole different environment that was believing of her skills and talents. And we saw this woman literally blossom. It was incredible. So, you know, community where that space is allowed to blossom, to add in, my gift is this. This is what I love to do. This is what I can offer. And then the next person is like, yeah, this is what I like to do. This is what I can offer. And that, you know, there's still a cooperation. There has to be a governance model. I've looked a lot at a governance model called sociocracy. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's it's a round table basically where everyone in the circle has a voice. Everyone has to have no objections to a proposal. And so it's a group think. It's where everyone has a voice, even if you're a shy person, even if you're a person who, you know, may not feel comfortable speaking out loud, you have a voice. And I know people personally like that who appreciate that because they want to speak. They want to be part of something. So that would be my, I guess, ideal community.
We want to thank you for your time. I know that it's an ongoing process to find our path and to find the connections that we need. And when we think of the challenge that I had with intentional communities, we lived at the farm intentional community for 2 years, and is that they get separated from the greater cities and culture, and they become a culture on itself. And for me, it's like, how do you impact the culture that is already there? How do you become someone who creates change? So I believe that being part of greater society is very important. And then without voices like yours, we miss out of the wisdom that someone can share through their struggles, through their suffering, through their challenges. And utopian societies have their own challenges, and sometimes issues get swept under the rug because they still have this idealistic thing they want to keep. So it's almost like with the Catholic Church and big institutions, like they have like a face they want to show to the world, and then all the problems get pushed down. And the only way that you grow is through facing your problems and finding creative solutions and working together to achieve them. So for last question, have you experienced in the special needs community things like that? Like, is there like a orthodoxy on how do you help children and adults with these challenges? And if you don't do it a certain way, there's a problem with you? And even among people who are hippies or alternative thinkers, sometimes someone who's a little too square or a little too traditional in the education or psychology or something like that gets tossed aside as like they're holding us back, they're not allowing us to thrive. Or is it eclectic where everybody can pursue their own path and there is no judgments and no cliques?
I wish there was no judgments. I think, again, that when we started this conversation, that's been a big piece for me, and particularly around COVID, you know, the last 2 years, we've all witnessed so much division. Oh my God, it doesn't matter where you look, there's division in so many areas. And for me, that in itself is is an alert light that's going out saying emergency, emergency, because I do believe that, you know, at the core, we're all humans. And so what I found in my search, and I write about it in my book, is that, and this is long before COVID even started, is for every idea that you would have over here on something to do for your special needs child, there was another juxtaposed idea that said, no, don't do that. That's bad. That you know. So in the book that I wrote, I basically encourage parents to do your research. You know, I like the title of your podcast because I'm definitely open to mysticism, but also I'm a skeptic. So if people tell me things and it doesn't feel right in my body, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to look. I'm going to do the research. And so you have to do your own research, and then you have to make your own decision. You know, a lot of people would have said to me, with the work that I did with the Sunrise program, that it was wrong, that it was not something I should have been doing with Julianne. um, Again, you have these debates about integration or not, right? And Julianne always had kids, but we organized that. We had children play dates, come and work with her as a playmate, play baseball with her, help her bike riding, go skiing with her, whatever. Go by, you know, there's different things, but we orchestrated that. So you have those debates. Inclusion, you have these people are saying inclusion is the way to go, that's the way to go, and then you have other people they're saying no, 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 that's not the way to go. And there's all kinds of studies that go on. And so I think at the end of the day, people ultimately have to make their own decision. What I would like to see is that people are given the freedom to make their decision, and then that's okay. That, you know, you make your decision, I make my decision, and we can still live in peace, even though we don't agree. Can we just agree to disagree? You know, that old saying. There's so much in that, though. And I feel like, given the last 2 years, we've thrown that saying out the window. It's like, no, you got to believe in what I believe. Either way, you got to go this way, you got to go that way. And it's, what is it causing? Division. That's it. Division, divisiveness. And I don't think that we as humans are meant to be divided. You know, I'm cautious about that idea. I feel, you know, we've all heard. I'm not an ultra historian, but we all know the saying, divide and conquer. Everybody knows that. So where's that coming from? Where is that? Why is that even happening? I don't intuitively. It doesn't resonate for me that we as a species should be divided at this time. I feel that really, truly, given, you know, our climatic situation and so forth, that we as a species need to come together and work together and listen to each other. And if people like Julianne don't even have the capacity to have a voice, sit with them, like you said, sit with them. And this woman who wrote The Stroke of Insight, she recommended that too. She's like, please, you know, remember that there's still a human in there. Even if they have a stroke, they're still aware on some level, you know, to sit with them. And by, you know, our brains coming together. I don't know if you've ever done meditation with a group, or, you know, there seems to be this collective, when there's a collective coming together and you have an intention of being a loving being, there's some potency that gets brought into that space, whether you're speaking or not, you know. So I'm not sure if I answered the question, but that those would be my final thoughts for this evening.
Wonderful. Well, again, thank you for your time, and we would love for you to keep updating us on different projects and possibilities out there. we have some friends in Canada that are advocating for the Native community over there. So
Awesome.
maybe I don't know how much you're involved politically, but we want to get like a good picture of what's going on in North America, because again, sometimes stuff is hidden and it doesn't come out, or the politicians play a lot of games. So I'm glad that there's resources for kids with special abilities, but here in the US, it seems like it's all driven by racism or certain agendas. And the more diverse the state, the more resources are available, and the less diverse. Well, it's actually strange in Tennessee, since the minority population is so low, there's actually free medical care for the children. And I'm like, how is it that they were able to pass that at there, and then in Texas we can't get anything passed? So there's countless children that have no medical health care at all, or if they have it, it's only emergency care. When they have to have emergency Medicaid. So we can talk about advocating for all kinds of people with health concerns later on. But again, it's one challenging thing at a time, and I'm glad that you and your supporters have tried it and made a lot of good headway in advocating for the community with autism.
Thank you so much, David, for having me. And I'm definitely a supporter and I absolutely would love to help your friends. So if you can send me that information where they are, that would be great as well. And thank you for doing what you're doing, because again, see, I would not be doing this, because this is not my forte, is setting this up and putting it on Spotify and all these things. That's not that. I pull my hair out when I have to do stuff like that. So bless you, and for all the other things that you do. I know all the work you do with people, and that special time, particularly when people are leaving the planet. But maybe that's just one last thing I want to share is a thought that I heard through a woman named Jacqueline Hobbs, and it really made sense to me. Was we're dying every day. Like, this conversation we had an hour ago is already done. Deepak Chopra, I listened to him recently, and he talked about it's done. That 50 minutes ago, it's over. It's a death. In a sense, it's finished. It's a movie is ended. We've walked out of the theater. And so we really only have the present. And so I really encourage every listener to really, be in your present moment and dream your dreams from your present moment and never give up. Those are my beliefs. And thank you so much for having me. And yeah, we'll keep in touch for sure.